Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and viewers. If you're watching us on our YouTube channel, I'm your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by your faithful host, Josh Bertram. What's going on, Josh?
Hey, Will. Doing well, thank you.
Hey, and returning back to the show is Diana Florence. She is a former I want to make sure I get this right. She's a former Manhattan prosecutor. Is that fair?
That's right.
Okay. And she is here to help us work through only two this time indictments of Trump. So recently, just for anybody that, hasn't been paying attention to the news, Trump had a superseding indictment about a week or two ago. And just recently, he had another indictment for January 6th. So we're going to kind of work through both of those, answer some questions that people have had. And, the story's kind of been out now for about a week. So all the commentary that was going to be said about it has been said. So hopefully we don't repeat any of that and kind of, use what we know about the indictments and try to make sense of it all. So, thanks again for coming back, Diana.
You're welcome. I'm looking forward to a fun conversation.
Yeah. So, okay. So where do we start? So we will start first with the superseding indictment. So maybe you can just educate us on what is a superseding indictment, and like how does it relate to, say, the original indictment?
Sure. So just to sort of frame Mr. Trump's legal troubles, we have New York, which is a state prosecution, and that involves false document charges related to a payoff way before he was president. And then we have Florida, which is a federal indictment, which was initially, I guess, announced in, was it April or May? And that those charges relate to just after he was president. And the newest one is the during presidency, if you will, but after he's learned about the election. So we'll start with the number two, the middle indictment, which is the Florida indictment. And again, the two last indictments, those are being handled by a special prosecutor, Jack Smith, who is appointed by the Department of Justice. So that's a federal case. And just as everyone knows, there are two. In the U.S. is different than most countries. Most countries just have one justice system. We actually have two. We have a federal justice system, and we have a state justice system. And you can have. It's not unusual. It's not usual, but it is certainly not. Only Mr. Trump has faced charges in both the state and federal level. Okay, so what do we have to in terms of Florida? Mr. Trump is dealing with charges related to classified documents. And a superseding indictment means that they learned more things, or more likely that more witnesses came forward. Probably even more likely they were, they weren't coming forward because they loved being witnesses, but more likely they came forward because they could have faced indictment if they didn't sort of get in line. So they superseded and added more charges to Mr. Trump, and they added a new defendant, Mr. I think D. Oliveris. I think in the original indictment, it was just Mr. Trump and Mr. Nauta, who was his sort of assistant, and now there's Mr. D. Oliveris. So to answer your question, after now giving all that framing, superseding is just literally what it sounds like. It's just, it's like chapter 2. It's basically this, it's basically updating the indictment with more charges. But prosecutors don't just get to do that by getting, in front of their desk and, putting on some tunes and typing things up. They actually have to go back in front of a grand jury and present evidence. Now, on the federal side, unlike the state side, it's pretty easy. You put you can use hearsay. So you can call an FBI agent to say certain things, evidence that they've learned throughout the investigation. Whereas on the state side, it's more like a trial. You actually have to call the witnesses. Doesn't mean they didn't call witnesses in the federal side, but that's generally how it's done.
So when you have this superseding indictment that wasn't included in the original indictment, so the idea is that, make sure I understand what you're saying. They had this indictment, then they found out some more dirt, That's non-technical speak, right? And so they went to someone and said, hey, we're going to prosecute you, potentially put you in jail, but if you come and testify against Trump, then we won't do that. That kind of idea? Is that okay?
More or less, yes.
More or less, right? I mean, obviously that's not like the specific blow by blow of what happened, but yeah, so that kind of idea. So that is crazy. So there's this security footage that was deleted or something along those lines. You know, I'm not the political guy, so I just hear little snippets from, you know, I check Will's Twitter and Facebook for my news. So he said something about a security footage being deleted, and now Trump is talking about it all over Truth Social. Is this like a whole thing? Like, how are we supposed to presume him innocent? You know, right? The presumption of innocence when there's everyone knows him. How can they find a trial of people that are going to be independent? Anyway, those are like 5 different questions. But what's going on with this security footage and him posting all over? Can that be used against him? Stuff on Truth Social?
Absolutely. I mean, of course, let me be clear. Yes, it can be used against him, but of course it needs to be introduced properly at trial, and there needs to be a foundation. But, you know, what's funny is that, you know, when you go and select a jury, it's ironic. You want people, of course, like all of us, right? We're pretty informed, and we read and we watch and we listen, right? But ironically, you want to try to find those people that are just completely living in their own little bubble and don't know this stuff, so they can be a blank slate. So maybe not people you want to be friends with, but, you know, ideally, probably the most interesting, the best jurors are probably people that can be the most of an open mind, and maybe people that aren't on Twitter, you know, 24/7, not reading the news all the time, and can really kind of close their mind. Because I think it's natural to say, we've learned all this stuff. How do you just sort of kind of go, okay, no, I'm only going to consider what's before you in at the trial? That's always a challenge in a high profile case. And, you know, look, the jurors have to give that assurance that they're basing their verdicts only on the evidence in the courtroom, not what's on social media or in the newspapers or in the media.
Yeah. So, like, I'm assuming you've been doing this for 20 some odd years. You've probably have some experience on jury selection and stuff. So, yes. Like, I mean, like how does one, or maybe the better question is like, what does that process look like? So, like, I've never been on jury duty, like, and I don't know why. Like, I vote. I don't think I'm like some conscientious observer or whatever, you know, but I've just never been called. So maybe I will after this episode airs, but how does that work? Like, how do you get a group of people, and determine whether or not they, you know, believe X, Y, or Z, and then make that decision on whether or not they're a good juror or not?
Yeah, it's a real challenge. So I've probably tried about 75 cases or so, and most of those were jury trials. And again, you know, not to be the broken record, state is a little bit different than federal, but and the main difference is that in the federal system, the judge asks the questions. In the state system, the lawyers ask the questions. But regardless of who asks the questions, you know, the process is, and you're lucky. Well, I've certainly been called for jury duty. I've never been picked, but I've certainly had to sit there. I mean, it's good you get some good reading done. It's not the worst thing in the world, but yeah, anyone who has a driver's license, you know, votes, generally, you know, is called at some point. And you can also be called for federal jury duty. So it doesn't matter. It will be in the district. So you're not going to be called for federal jury duty. You know, you're in Virginia. You're not going to be called in Florida, right? You would only be in the district of Virginia that you live in. So you can be called for either. And what happens is that you're in a just sort of general room, and then there'll be various cases. You could be called for criminal jury duty or civil jury duty. And what happens is then within that pool, then they'll send a random amount. They know nothing about you, right? And they send the group to the courtroom, and the lawyers get together again, if it's a federal system, and they come up with questions that they want asked of jurors. So there are general pedigree questions. Where do you live? You know, again, in criminal cases, usually it's a very common question. Have you been a victim of a crime? Any family members? What do you do? What does your, family do? those are anyone lawyers. And then you might ask sort of hypotheticals. You can't really do things like, what do you think of classified documents? But you might ask things, for example, like circumstantial evidence is a very big part of proving things. So an example of circumstantial evidence that we often use as lawyers would be, if you wake up in the morning and the night before it was, the streets were dry, and then you wake up in the morning and there's puddles, what can you, do you agree with me that it's reasonable to infer that it rained? Yes, that's circumstantial evidence. And so then you sort of say, can everyone here agree that, that circumstantial evidence, that you can make inferences like that? It's a logical inference. You don't have to. Yes. I mean, someone could have come with a hose, right? But
it's possible.
Right. I mean, there's always possibilities, right? But the likely inference there is it rained last night. So those are the kinds of questions. And again, you as the lawyer, whether you're representing the defendant or the government, right? Generally you want people who are going to be down the line, who are going to be fair and again, be able to put aside their differences. I mean, what I think my best juries were always literally like, the people that you meet in the neighborhood. It could be a professor, it would be a fireman, it would be a bus driver, it would be a lawyer, it would be an accountant. It would be like a really interesting, and it was always fun to see them at the end of trials because they actually sometimes became friends and things like that. But yeah, I mean, essentially that's what's going to happen. Now, of course, in the Trump case, everything is it's like on steroids, right? You're going to have a questionnaire that's going to be, this thick, right? With questions. And of course, there's going to be political questions. We never, in regular criminal cases, we don't ask about people's party affiliation or anything like that. So it's going to be much more complicated. But, ultimately, they're going to have to find, 12 people and a few alternates to sit on these in various jurisdictions.
What are they going to do? Like you're going to get 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 2 independents or something like that? I mean what do you, like, they can't ask you who you voted for, right?
Well, they really can't. I mean, obviously,
because that's a pretty important question, isn't it? When you're trying an ex-president, did you vote for him or not?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I feel like,
can't ask that.
They really can't. I think, believe it or not, I know we're very engaged, but there's a lot of people out there that don't really care, right? We know.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. So in some ways, you kind of want the less engaged people. That's why I say it's ironic. Sometimes you really don't want to be hanging out with. The best jurors are not people that are the most interesting or people you want to hang out with necessarily, but they're maybe not as engaged. They're not interested interested in the world around them, and they can make decisions,
That's
absolutely
funny. I remember when Trump was impeached the first time, I was telling somebody at my work about it, and they're like, what? Like, Trump got impeached? Like, and instead of my normal reaction of like, how can you not know this? Like, I actually felt like a sense of like, I don't know, happiness for that person. that they're like so
how
disconnected.
can you be you? I just want to be you and ignore the world.
Yeah,
with that, right? Living, kind of, without all, it's a lot less stressful, I'm sure.
Yeah. So let's talk about the judge here in Florida. So she's also overseeing the superseding indictment too, right?
Yes.
Okay, and I know that there's a lot of people that are scratching their heads because they like the judge is random, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, and like, so how do they figure that out? Like, is it just like playing bingo or something, and they pull out a?
Yeah, it's literally there's one of those little things. I mean, I don't know if in the Fed system, but in the state system, they still have that little hexagonal thing that you put the crank.
Yeah, because Trump, and he appointed, like, how many judges did he appoint? Like, wasn't it unprecedented? Like hundreds. So like, what's the likelihood that it would just randomly come out with a judge that he appointed? Probably decent, right?
Yeah, especially in Florida, right?
Yeah, in Florida.
Yeah, and
work a little less so, probably.
Yeah, and she's
definitely.
I mean, she's fairly junior, I think. I mean,
yes.
Like
1981, bro.
Yeah, it's like what am I doing in my life? I mean,
exactly. Exactly.
So I mean, like, how does one that young, like prosecute or not, or what's preside over
Mm-hmm.
probably the most historic case in American history. Like, and how can Trump and and the special counsel expect to get a fair trial like out of that? Like, if you're in that situation, like, what are things that would go through your head? Like, oh man, like this person is, very inexperienced.
I think it's sort of the phenomena of, like, when you're sort of just coming up out of high school or college, and you think like grown-ups know more, and then as you get a little older you realize nobody's grown up, really. No one really knows much, like that's what you sort of get. That's kind of, how sad to say,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
how it is with a lot of judges. I used to think all judges were like these wise creatures. They're people, right? I mean, some of them, and it doesn't have to do with her age, right? Or, it's to do with, whether she's really experienced and really up to the job. And look, I can't say that she's more or less than anyone else in that courthouse. I mean, it's not based on her age or her, she was confirmed by the Senate. And unfortunately, we're living in very polarized, times. It's not so much, I think the idea that we live in a meritocracy is, probably something we should sort of leave behind. That's, as much as I'd love it to be true, I don't think it necessarily is. So this is the judge we have. She was appointed by Trump, and she does have a history of making incredibly favorable rulings when it came to the search warrant.
Yeah.
But then she was immediately slapped down by a bipartisan appellate court, of both, comprised of Republicans, even some Trump appointees. So, I mean, as much as we can, we live in the partisan world and all that stuff, I do think that, sometimes, there are things that supersede. Look, Georgia is a great example. I know I don't want to go off zigzagging, but, those officials in Georgia had every reason to want Trump and not Biden. And yet, they
Right.
had the courage to stand up to
Freaking honest people.
Yeah. So, there is honesty. There are people out there, even if we don't agree with them politically or we don't have the same parties, there, I'm still a little bit of an optimist, but yeah. So, I mean, I would say, but I think the fact that she, Judge Cannon was, sort of slapped down by, or, reversed, I should say, by the appellate court, I think bodes well for the government getting a fair trial, because she's gonna be more careful and she's gonna realize that they're gonna rubber stamp. So
Yeah, it's funny when you said slap down. I cannot help but imagine just like judges in like full court, just like wrestling in like one of those WWF like rings, like one just DDT in the other ring. That's not allowed. Anyway, so what I'm that is neither here nor there. So with this Aileen Cannon, right? So she has made mistakes before, or there's like this, like I guess, controversy about that. Are they blowing that out of proportion? I guess like forgot to swear at the jury at against a man who had who ran a child sex abuse website. What's going? Is that like something we should? Oh my gosh, you shouldn't do this because of that, or how? What's really going on there? How big of a deal is that?
no, I mean, well, that's a huge deal. Yes, I mean, that's bad, but I also think that she's the judge and she's going to have to rise to the occasion. And I don't think she's out there, by herself. Certainly, judges have bosses. There's a presiding judge in the Southern District of Florida. I'm sure the more experienced judges will help her, will oversee. This is a case that's unprecedented. I don't think she's just going to be like, oh, you handle it the best you can. So, I mean, yes, she made
Good luck. Let us know how it goes.
Exactly. I think there'll be some oversight, let's just say.
Oh, okay. So, switching gears now to the most recent indictment, the January 6th case. So, help us kind of understand I guess it's three counts or three charges, but one of them had two. One of them occurred twice. Like, can you help us kind of better understand what those counts are?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically there are four counts, but they're all basically having to do with conspiracy to undermine our democratic process. They're just different charges. They're under the federal system. They were originally sort of used in Ku Klux Klan prosecutions many years ago. But at the crux of it, these are conspiracy charges to overthrow the government. These are serious, very, very serious. I think this is the most serious, as the classified documents is nothing to sneeze at, and certainly a very strong case. But this obviously is the most alarming and serious. And the amount of jail time that he's facing would essentially be a life sentence. I mean, he's 77 years old, and I think it's, cumulatively 40 something years. So, unless he lives, an incredible lifespan, I think it would be a life sentence if he's convicted on this.
Well, he is Trump, and he is a superhuman, by the way, who beat COVID on his own. So I wouldn't put, by his sheer will, he beat COVID. So I wouldn't put it past him.
That's possible. It's true. So yeah, this is very, very serious. And really, I think when you look at these charges, and again, if you sort of try to take away our partisan hats, really what it comes down to is knowledge and intent. And honestly, that's what most white collar cases, and this is a white collar, the whitest collar of them all, if you will, right? And
by the whitest man there is.
That's why they're using the Klan charge, right?
Yes, exactly. It all full circle. So essentially, Mr. Trump is essentially, he's already said this is a political witch hunt, and we all know that sort of defense. But the biggest actual defense that he is going to be repeating, ad nauseum will be, I legitimately believe this, and I still believe it. And so if I'm legitimately believing this, there's no crime here. Unfortunately for Mr. Trump, at least from my reading, there is mountains of evidence that suggest otherwise, including, to me, one of the most damning things is when the Vice President Pence refused to kind of go along with the scheme, and he said, "You're too honest." That's very smoking gun. You don't say that if you believe this. That's not what you would say, right? That's an admission that this is horse crap, if you will.
Yeah, and I am a little bit I don't know, content that Mike Pence has started selling T-shirts that says I'm too honest or something like that. Because like when I read that in the indictment, I was like, man, if that isn't used on like the campaign trail,
yeah.
You're missing it. So okay, is this, in your opinion, a strong case based on what we know so far, either from the January 6th committee stuff and or what's in the indictments? Because one of the things I always like to do just to kind of check my sanity and my bias is I like to read and listen to conservative podcasts and stuff. So I really like the McCarthy Report by Annie McCarthy. The Dispatch has one called Advisory Opinions with Sarah Isgur and David French. With the Secret Files, both podcasts were like, yeah, he's pretty much toast. With this one, they seem a little bit more reserved to say this is a slam dunk. So how do you feel about this?
Oh, I think it's a slam dunk. To me, again, it's about his repeated sort of charging forward in public, and in private, sort of the contrast of, him calling his attorney pal that, she's crazy, or, the repeated advisors, campaign, managers, who, lawyers telling him there's no evidence of fraud. And to me, it's the juxtaposition of the public Trump and the private Trump that's going to do him in. Going for a moment back to the middle indictment, if you will, the classified documents, I agree. It's also a slam dunk. And again, it's different than, I know people want to talk about, Hillary or Hunter Biden, but the reality is or President Biden with his classified documents. The difference here is that if he had just given the documents back, we wouldn't be here. But again, it's always, we learned this back in, my childhood, Watergate, right? It's always the cover up is worse than the crime.
Yeah.
And that, like, the number 2 is literally the cover up is worse than the crime. It's all the things he did to keep the documents, to destroy servers, to lie to governmental officials. It's all of that that makes that a slam dunk. And then again in the latest indictment, it's all the things that happen in private, the text message conversations, all those things that surround him that then he is directly involved in. That I just think that this is not a case I would want levied against me. I'll tell you.
Yeah,
Wow.
like anybody that follows this stuff closely, I think could easily see a pattern of behavior. I mean, going all the way from the Mueller report, like in the second part, like he has this personality where he really tries to force an outcome that's beneficial to him, regardless if it's legal or not. But he kind of has his minions do it, but I'm curious. So, like with this particular January 6th indictment, I can't help but think, like, if you've seen the movie Jurassic Park, like Jeff Goldblum's, like, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could,
Yes.
they didn't think if they should, like,
Yeah.
like, is this a case that should have been brought, versus like, like we could bring it, but,
The
like,
January 6th one? Yeah, no, January 6th should be brought. I mean, I would say if there's any of the 3 that probably, could have waited, would be the first case, in New York. As much as
Yeah.
I love my, my city, that case is the least exciting. It's the least, it's the oldest. It's the least serious. No, the January 6th one, I think, as this is the heart of our democratic process. I don't see how the congressional hearings were beset by politics, like, by definition, right? So I think people voted on party lines regardless of what the evidence was. Here, hopefully, again, we don't, the jury system isn't perfect, but I think for the most part it works. I think this is something, the evidence is laid out. And I will say, I have to commend the special prosecutor. They write excellent indictments. Most lawyers are not known for writing clear and concise without using big words and whatever. This is a very, very well written and lays out in detail and a very easy to understand, what the case is and why it's so compelling.
Yeah, we just real fast, Josh. When the documents case one came out, we did an episode with gosh, I'm gonna forget his name. Bob Dietz, and like real funny guy. He teaches at George Washington, George Mason, whatever. He teaches somewhere up there, but he used to be the chief counsel or senior counsel for the CIA and DOD and some other geospatial, some other 3-letter agencies, So we had him on, and then I had a friend of ours, Karina Lane, who's a constitutional professor, former prosecutor, and we were asking questions about the way the indictments are being written, and both of them said, like, the way the documents case was written was like they're gonna do like papers about that in the future, because it was written in such plain language that articulated what actually went wrong, so the average person could read it. And I was like, yeah, I agree, but like, why don't you just let me write it, because I could write in plain language, because I don't speak like you lawyers, but
That's not what lawyers are really supposed to do. I mean, I think one of the reasons I was successful when I was doing my work, in construction, which was very complicated, engineering and all that stuff, it's about making it accessible. Because at the end of the day, these are laws, again, we go to the religious part of this, right? I mean, a lot of the laws that we're talking about, they do go back to the 10 Commandments, right? I mean,
Yeah.
So, this is, we do need regular people. I mean, the flowery kind of flourishes of lawyers, that's a relic that's, happily left behind. I hope every lawyer coming up, or ones practicing, really see this and adjust their writing style accordingly. It's one of the things I was always proud of, that my pleadings could be read for a regular person.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so important because if someone doesn't understand what you're saying, then of course, and the public has a right to understand, especially in a case like this,
Yes.
right to understand what's happening. I think it's very important. I want to read a little bit from this indictment itself and just get a couple, like some questions that come up for me as I look at it. So just let me go through a couple lines and then I'll ask a question. So the first thing, it says the indictment, this is for the January 6th indictment. The grand jury charges that at all times material to this indictment on or about the dates and at the approximate time stated below. And then it goes on to say, that Donald Trump lost. And then shortly after election, this is like in section 4 of this, I guess 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know how you designate it, but he said the defendant also pursued unlawful means of discounting legitimate votes and subverting the election results. In doing so, the defendant perpetrated 3 criminal conspiracies: a conspiracy to defraud the United States by using dishonesty, fraud, and deceit to impair, obstruct, and defeat the lawful federal government function by which presidential elections are collected, counted, and certified, blah, 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 in violation of a code, okay, 18 USC 30, section 3, whatever. Conspiracy to corruptly obstruct and impede January 6th congressional proceedings. Then a conspiracy against the right to vote, to have one's vote counted in violation of 18 USC section 241. So my question is, so you have this grand jury. Mm-hmm. And I know we kind of talked about this before, but how do they get this grand jury and they present them with evidence, and then the grand jury puts their name on this document that the lawyer writes? Is that what happens?
Yes.
Okay, so they're basically saying, hey, we're all behind this.
Right.
But
so remember how I talked about how jury duty works? Grand jury duty is a variation of that. It's the same thing, same pool. You have a driver's license, you're a voter, you get called. And grand jury duty is a little bit different in that it's not necessarily, it could depend on what the case is and the jurisdiction. For example, in New York State, you can serve on a grand jury for, a half a day, Monday through Friday for 4 weeks. And that's just a regular grand jury. You could be on a special grand jury, which could last for 6 months, but it's 2 or 3 days a week. And, and they'll call you and say, we don't need you. And federal grand juries can also kind of fit that. So it's not that they're sitting every day. But again, it's a regular group of people, but there'll be less jury selection for a grand jury. It's literally just like, can you come? Do you have childcare? Will your job?
Do you breathe?
Right, pretty much, right? And again, remember, a grand jury, the difference in standard, this is something really important, right? It's not to convict. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. It's basically probable cause. So that just
means, we indict this person?
And probable cause, it means if we believe there's enough that we're going to charge this person, that they should then ultimately face trial. So it's not they're not guilty of anything. It's just a piece of paper. But it's significant because it's, the grand jury was originally back in Old England, in common law England. The idea is you don't want a prosecutor just being able to levy felony charges, and you do want it to be secret so that if they're wrong, right, you don't have the stigma of criminal charges. But yeah, so a grand jury is a group of citizens, and in New York it's 23. I think it's I don't know if it's the same, it's more or less that. And it's not a unanimous verdict either. It's just it's a majority basically. So
gotcha.
It would be 12 of 20, 12 or whatever. And then the other thing is that the so yes, if they have a report or there are things that they've written, they haven't written it, right? The lawyer's written it, but of course they can make it. They can make
right.
edits. And they have to vote to adopt it. So that's why it is the grand jury's.
So it's almost like a mini law that they have to vote to ratify or something like that.
Exactly.
So yes, we will.
Yes, exactly.
That's cool. So let me ask you this as a follow-up. So these 3 things: a conspiracy to defraud the United States using dishonesty, blah, 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 all that. A conspiracy to corruptly obstruct and impede January 6th congressional, and a conspiracy against the right to vote and have one votes counted. So my question, this is, so each of these, and of course most people, anyone can go read it, but probably most people aren't going to. And the question is if can you break down for us the kinds of evidence, the types, like, what are they using to make these actual claims, like text messages, or like how can someone say, for instance, how can someone come to the conclusion and prove that Donald J. Trump did knowingly combine, conspire, confederate, and agree with co-conspirators known and unknown to the grand jury to defraud the United States by using dishonesty, fraud, and deceit to impair, obstruct, and defeat the lawful federal government function by which the results of the presidential election are collected, counted, and certified by the federal government? How can we prove that?
Okay, yeah, and that's a great question. And I know that seems, it seems in a way, like it seems like an obvious question, but it's not, because I think you're asking really, I think you're asking a really good question. So we, the four of us sitting here together, three of us, sorry, I'm counting myself. There you go. It's late.
I understand. I was like, four, you're right. There is four. Oh, wait, no.
Yeah, no, the three of us here, right? We read, again, we follow social media, we read newspapers, we watch television, and we learn certain things, right? But again, those are things that we read about, and that's basically what that is hearsay. And some of the things we know from reading articles. We haven't actually interviewed witnesses or looked at the text.
Right.
So if we're a lawyer, it's a whole other thing to prove something in court. And so the way you do that is you can use his, because he's a public figure, right? And he was the president, his public statements, those can come into evidence, right? So, and those are, obviously you can introduce those with a proper foundation. You can get the CBS News tape, and probably the lawyer, on the other side isn't going to, unless they think it's been doctored, that's going to come into evidence. So you have statement X, right, from, January 1st or something, or January 5th or whatever. And then what you have are, as you mentioned, text messages there. What the prosecutor would have done in this case is a mountain of subpoenas and search warrants. And search warrants aren't just to, look in a house, but if you want to look on my phone, you have to have a search warrant. If you want to look on my computer, you have to have a search warrant.
Because a subpoena, the difference between a subpoena and search warrant, a subpoena is like an official request, but you don't have to do it. A search warrant gives them the right to go in and take what they want, correct? Or search and seize the things that...
If you get a subpoena, you have to comply.
You have to do a subpoena. That's not an optional thing. Okay.
No, but the thing is, the difference is that in a subpoena, so if they subpoenaed your phone, they could take my phone, but they can't look at it. You can't look at content on a phone unless you actually, because of right to privacy, right? I mean, phones, computers, right? There's a right to my computer has more documents than, or more data than a room full of file cabinets, right? So the computer is the modern day sort of, house, if you will. So you have to do a search warrant. There has to be probable, again, that word, probable cause. You can't just say, I don't like Diana, I'm going to take her computer, or I think she sort of looks funny. You have to write out certain facts. On this day she did X, this day she did Y. Therefore, we think that the evidence of this crime would be found on her phone, on her computer. So in this particular case, and now we're going to Trump, right? We know that there are multiple campaign managers, advisors, people like that. They would have been sent letters. They would have been possibly, been targets of search warrants. They would have been given, they would have had the opportunity to come in and be interviewed. Through those interviews, through those search warrants of looking at those, those text messages and things like that, that will garner evidence. Another thing that happens, and I don't know that could come into play here, something called cell sites. So right now, if you were, just how if you want to check up on your, teenager, right, you can see, you can look that they, find my iPhone, and you can see that they're, on the corner of Main Street and Elm. Those cell sites, that's something that, again, you need a search warrant for, because again, right to privacy, but they, to show that, a certain person is in a certain place, that corroborates that this thing happened at that time. So in other words, if we believe that Trump was meeting with, if we believed he was meeting with certain people in order to do the January 6th, and he's like, no, I was back packing my stuff. you could actually prove that through cell sites. So the very long answer to your rather short question is there are going to be witnesses. Some of those witnesses are people that have no culpability. They just were witnesses. For example, back in the Florida case in the superseding, right, we have the IT manager who refused to delete the files, said it didn't have authorization. That guy, he didn't do anything wrong, right? He actually did exactly, he said, I didn't delete. So he's a witness, right? He isn't criminal. But let's say if D. Oliveris, the guy who flooded the pool, the room with the pool, right? Mm-hmm. Now he's charged now, but if he were to flip, if he decided to testify, he certainly is a witness, but he's obviously a cooperating witness. He obviously has, criminal exposure. He may be, he might be testifying in exchange for a lesser sentence. I doubt he's going to get immunity at this point. He's been charged. So they're going to be witnesses like that. So we also know there's 6 people named, 6 co-conspirators who are unindicted as of this moment. Presumably all of those people have they for sure have been interviewed and maybe even testified in the grand jury in this case. And again, some of them may be testifying under a cooperation agreement that they have criminal exposure, and if you cooperate, we'll give you a lesser charge or no charges. So there's going to be a kind of a cocktail, if you will, a Trump cocktail, which will be one part witness testimony, one part text messages, one part documents, emails, and perhaps something like cell sites. That's going to be the recipe for a conviction cocktail, if you will.
That's so. If you ever go to the bar and they offer you a Trump cocktail, make sure you say no.
Good advice. See, you get more than anything on this.
I consider myself somewhat of a expert on the cell site stuff because I've watched 2000 Mules. So I know all about how the cell sites and can ping and can know exactly when you're dropping the fake ballot into the box. But I want to go back to the co-conspirators for a second. Mm-hmm. Why? How come they didn't get indicted at the same time the superseding one came through? Like so Nauta was indicted along with Trump.
Right.
So why didn't these co-conspirators?
Well, remember, we don't really know. I mean, we've all speculated that this one is this one, and we've matched it up and things like that, but we don't really know, and we don't know if they're facing their own charges. So what could happen is that they've worked out a plea deal, right, where under a cooperation agreement, they're going to plead to a lesser charge, and then, that's possible. It's possible, like with D. Oliveris, right, that they're still working on cooperating, or working something out, and if they don't work something out, that there'll be a superseding indictment. So we don't know for sure that these, as of right now, unindicted co-conspirators will continue to be unindicted co-conspirators.
Okay. So this is going to be kind of a silly question. But, so the judge ordered Trump basically not to talk to all these witnesses or whatnot. And ostensibly, Jack Smith has probably interviewed who knows how many witnesses, but it's probably definitely more than one. So if Trump goes on the debate stage and Pence is a witness, which I don't see how he could not be, can Pence brings up a question about the January 6th one or the like is that possible or how would that even work? Would Trump put himself at risk of violating the no contact with witnesses rule?
Well, I mean, look, the reality is, unlike perhaps anyone else in the universe, right? Any of us, if we had done anything close to similar, our bail would have been revoked on any of these cases.
Yeah.
Right? The chances of his bail being revoked and him being sent to prison for, talking to witnesses is slim to none. It's just not, I would be shocked if that happened. I mean, you're hypothetical at a debate. I mean, would Trump be, willing to sort of talk to Pence and say those things? I mean, it would not obviously be in his interest to do that, but you know what? I mean, he's done lots of things that don't seem to, you know, he's Teflon, right? So I can't say that. I don't know that. I mean, I think Pence would, you know, I think as you mentioned earlier in the conversation, I mean, Pence is, I mean, this is, if anyone cares about integrity in the Republican Party, I would think he's the guy, right? He's the one who could, you know, if people don't like Biden or they don't like, you know, Democrat, if they, I would think he would be the one that would have the most appeal because of the fact that he didn't go along with the scheme, right? I mean, think about if he had how much, you know, how chaotic our country would have been. You know,
yeah, I was going to say, you know, real quick, Josh, is like if Kamala Harris said half the things that Pence has said about Trump, like to Biden, you know, like I would be okay. I'm probably not going to vote for Biden, you know, like in the next election. But here you've got Pence saying all this stuff about his former the former president, and basically he's like, I don't know, thrown to the side, you know, he's the heretic.
Yeah, it's a very, I mean, I think back to my childhood, and I remember there was a candidate, Gary Hart, who got caught having an affair, and he was like, I think a leading contender for the nomination, and it completely derailed his campaign. And you think about if a time traveler went from whatever that was, 1982, to now, and they're like, what? You can do all these things and have 3 indictments pending and
still be someone that can come and run for president. I don't
and be like the leading, you know, like contender for the nomination.
I know.
It's really, when you look at it like from a like 30,000 foot like perspective, you're like, how, like, just putting this out there, like, how is this happening? I didn't understand how Trump was even someone that was a presidential nominee from the beginning. But again, all that is just bridge under the water at this point. Oh, wait, water under the bridge. Bridge over water, water under bridge. I need to remember that. So here's my question. Like, how difficult is it going to be? Like you said, it's a slam dunk case. Okay, that's awesome. Maybe you can elaborate a little more on why you feel that way. I know you said some before, but even more than that, even digging in deeper would be, what do you think will be the most difficult of these charges, of these conspiracies to prove? Which one do you think the lawyer's going to have the hardest time?
I mean, in some ways, I think the one, like, so conspiracy against the United States, to me, that just, I mean, it's the biggest one, right? That's a lot of people, right? That
is a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. I feel like that seems the most overwhelming. To me, like the, you know, sort of the undermining of the right to vote almost seems the easiest because of, frankly, and there's a little bit of overlap with what's going on, you know, in the Georgia investigation, right? So there was so much reported at the time. And one of the things, Josh, that we had, when you asked me about kinds of evidence, I mean, not so much in this indictment, but, you know, obviously recorded conversations and videos, right? Surveillance videos. These are all things that are going to come into evidence. And I mean, to sort of give you a contrast, I think I may have mentioned this before, you know, years ago, I did a case involving an international trafficking ring, and they were trafficking in motorcycles and guns, and I had them on video. I had wiretaps, I had text messages, I had an undercover officer. It was such a solid case, because even if you were like, well, the undercover, you can't believe him, well, oh, the video, you can't see it, oh, well, I hear the voice, I don't know if that's him. I mean, and then cell sites, I mean, how many things can you start to say? Like, you can't really doubt 5 things. I mean, you can, but most reasonable people will be like, okay, yeah, we're convinced. So I think, to me, that it's more the concept. It doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, I think that the evidence in all 3 of these is pretty much, it's not the same, but it's very sort of interconnected.
There are a lot of overlapping.
Yeah. So
evidence.
I think that, I mean, again, it's really, these cases are very much mosaics, and there are lots of pieces, and it's the sort of who he is and the evidence that he has, sort of been part and parcel of. And I forgot which one of you said this, but yes, this is who he was. This is who he is. And he's been for 77 years. And it's really worked for him, right? He became president. He is up until this point, until 2023, he has never faced any criminal prosecution. He's had a few civil cases, but criminal is a big deal. And now they're all coming to fruition. We'll see if any result in conviction. That's another story. But 3 indictments is scary. It's scary stuff.
Anybody that's read Maggie Haberman's book, Confidence Man, I think could almost predict how Trump would react just about any situation. And we had on the show recently a clinical psychologist who works in the political space. And we asked her kind of tongue in cheek, but she did a pretty good job of sort of like diagnosing Trump and Biden. It basically boiled down to like, yeah, he's a narcissist. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, I think we already knew that, but it was nice hearing it from somebody that like actually studied this stuff. But like, what's Trump's best defense, you think, in the January 6th case?
Oh, I think it's that he sincerely believes it, and it is, and doubling down on it, on the truth of it being fraudulent, right? So, because again, it's really, as I said at the beginning of our conversation, it's about knowledge. Did he know that this was fraud, or if he sincerely believed that this was a hoax and that he was basically stealing the election? That's the key. So to me, that if you double down, and his lawyers are skilled, which I'm sure they will be, in saying, look, he has a right to fight, he believes this is, but the thing that's going to be tough, right, is you have to prove why that would be a rational thing to believe, right? And what's the hurdle for him, and why I think this is a really slam dunk case, is because, again, paragraph after paragraph in that indictment, all the people telling it's not true, it's not possible, we've tried this. And again, it's really the evolution of the way all of this worked, right? At the beginning, I mean, it's unusual certainly for a president or a candidate to say it's fraud, but it could, like, we had Bush v. Gore, right? Mm-hmm. It's reasonable to fight if you think there's something askew. But if your inner circle and people that should know are telling you this is ludicrous, and then you basically go on and do this false elector scheme, which is really, unbelievable. Mm-hmm. That's where I think things break down, and I do think that's why he's ultimately going to be convicted of this.
Yeah, but I guess maybe what I'm confused about is, like, if you have a colorblind person and you try to tell them, okay, the color of your shirt is periwinkle, and you have everybody, yeah, it's periwinkle. But the colorblind person is like, like I don't believe you because I don't have the capability to confirm what it is that you have to say. Like how do we? I mean, like, having everybody just tell you, okay, no, sir, sorry, you lost the election. Like that doesn't necessarily mean that he, what's the word? Like understood it, rationalized it, accepted it. So like, how do you even like prove that that's actually what he really believed?
Well, he's not mentally ill. If we were going to say that he had lacked capacity, right, that would be a different kind of defense. I do not think that's going to happen here, right? Mm-hmm. So in the end, it's about what's reasonable, right? Again, it's a reasonable standard. When we you and I talked offline, like, one of my areas of passion was workplace, and I know you were doing the workplace safety, mm-hmm. and I prosecuted construction accidents that were really not accidents, right, where people died. Mm-hmm. When you were judging whether you were going to prosecute the foreman, right, it's not based on what Diana, know about digging trenches, because that's very little, right, but what's reasonable for the person that's overseeing it, right? So again, it's about in the moment. You could keep saying, oh, I don't know what periwinkle means, but if say, okay, well, you're colorblind, but that blueberries look different than strawberries, right? You can sort of see that there's and the sky is a color that's more like a blueberry, and there's again, and then you're 10 people, you're like, no, I refuse to believe this is periwinkle. It's like, well, it's not red, it's not yellow, it's not green, it's not black or white. We're telling you it's periwinkle, and they're like, no, I refuse to believe that. That's just irrational and not reasonable. And the jury can see like what a reasonable person, not what Donald Trump, because he's obstinate and just says, I don't care. Again, if it's one thing for him to just believe it, if no one were telling him this stuff, right? If everyone were yes-manning him, then we would have a much different case, but they weren't. That's to me what is the crux of it. It's all go back and read that indictment and read all the things that people were saying to him in private.
Okay, so do you have time for just a few audience questions?
Sure.
And I'm reading these verbatim, so apologies for any sort of grammar or anything like that. Okay, so first question's person is asking, how many of the indictments are criminal, and do those indictments open the door for discovery?
So an indictment by definition is a criminal case, right? A complaint, just so we can all learn our legal word of the day. So a complaint can be civil or criminal. But if you hear the word indictment, that necessarily means a grand jury was involved. It is criminal. And the difference between criminal, civil, you can lose some money. Criminal, you lose your liberty. So that is the major difference between criminal and civil. You could maybe get money in a civil case, in a criminal case, restitution, but you're not going to get damages for the most part in a criminal case. That's civil. So they're all criminal indictments. Sorry, what was the other part of that question?
Asking if it opens the door for discovery.
Yes. So discovery, whether it's civil or criminal, of course, there's going to be discovery. Now, again, the nature of these cases, the classified documents we've already read about because they're classified, right? You have to, there's a fine line, and often discovery these are public trials that would be open to you and me, right? So there's all sorts of redactions and limiting orders to sort of, to limit what's public, and also to redact, and then to even in certain cases, what the client can see versus the attorneys, because ultimately discovery is about making sure the lawyers can present a valid defense. It's important for a defendant to understand what they're being charged with, and the lawyers to have all the information so they can provide the most complete and vigorous defense they can. So yes, there'll be discovery in all of these.
Got it. And this is sort of just an add-on question. So like during that phase, does the prosecution share with the defense, like, I don't know, like probably like evidence, or
Yeah.
I mean, and so the defense can actually start making a real legitimate defense against the things they're being charged.
Yeah, to Josh's questions, right? All that evidence that that they need to prove, the defense needs to see if there's surveillance tapes, if there's cell site data, if there's text messages, if there's bank records, anything like that. Yeah, that's discoverable. Witness interviews, anything like that is going to be discoverable and turned over to the defense with the supervision of the judge. If there are things that, for whatever reason, would compromise an ongoing investigation or things like that, again, there are, you can get a protective order, they call it, in order to sort of shield that. But again, that has to be litigated, and a judge would be overseeing that.
Okay. So the second question says, we know Hillary destroyed, in parentheses, bleached phones and hard drives from her personal server, which could have had classified material on it, but wasn't able to be examined after. Also, Biden had unsecured classified documents as well. How does what Trump did differ from what Hillary and Biden did?
The major difference is that Trump had about 7 chances to return the documents, right? I mean, we'll take Biden, because the Hillary thing's a little harder, because we don't know if there was classified things on it, right? It doesn't the Biden thing, when they found it, they returned it. So that's the difference, right? That's why he's in. That's why they're in trouble, right? Is because he refused to return it and then made, all sorts of, movements and actions that involved other people to retain it, and then to obviously then to disclose it. So that's what it is, the withholding, not so much the taking, if you will.
Yeah. Is it fair to reason, this is sort of just an add-on question, is it fair to reason that, we may not see or know about any charges against Biden until after he's president because of like the OLC memo?
Yes, but I would be surprised if there were charges related to the classified documents because he gave them back. You know what I mean? To me, it's not a strict liability. So there's, like, again, I won't go too in the weeds on law, but there's there's intentional, and then there's different states of mind, right? So intentional is I intentionally shoot you. Negligent is I wave a gun around and the gun goes off, right? And then strict liability is, well, I have a gun, therefore I'm guilty, right? So strict liability is having the documents, therefore you're guilty. That's not what this is, and that's what we have to be clear about. Like, it is not simply having them. There could be reasons why, again, there's a lot of things that are classified, things like that, and these are high-level people. You give them back if you're requested, and that's where things go south for Mr. Trump. It's not about the taking of them per se.
Okay, last question. I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention the name Hunter once, so here it goes. Do you think it's strange that a day or two after every Hunter Biden court hearing or revelation that Trump is indicted?
I think that, the federal, obviously prosecutors and they can decide the timing of when they want to release things. I don't think that there's, the correlation. I don't think that Jack Smith was working with the Bidens to release it in a certain time. I think that there's certain reasons beyond the case and beyond the news cycle. I think, for example, we do have a presidential election, and I think the sooner these things are out and tried, if in fact Mr. Trump is innocent of these charges, it would be good for him to get all these trials done before the election, right? Then he can basically say, I've been found not guilty by all these. But I think, to me, that's it. I don't think necessarily. Hunter Biden has his own issues, and certainly he's got his own problems. I don't think that just because one person has problems, the other one, does or doesn't.
Yeah, of course. So this one wasn't on my list, but it is something that I don't think I've heard a very good answer about. But it's one that a lot of people are parroting, and that's, hey, it's been 2.5 years. Like, what the heck? Why couldn't these charges be brought, January 21st or whatnot? So like, you don't necessarily have to go into all the details of all the boxes you have to check, but like, give us a sense of why it's taken us this long.
Well, for one thing, he's the former president of the United States. You don't charge someone like that lightly. It's a big deal. You cannot simply just just bring charges for fun. And in addition, you have to figure out, is there evidence and what the charges are? These are not robberies, right? These are very complicated charges. Do you have all the elements? There was a mountain of people that were interviewed. There's a lot of evidence that needs to be looked at. And again, you don't bring a case like this unless you have a really, really strong basis. And so, to me, 2.5 years for this nature is actually not particularly slow. I think that's a pretty speedy time period.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Diana, for
yes, thank you so much,
helping us work through the craziness of all these indictments. So we'll probably have you back on again 2 days after the next Hunter Biden court hearing. Because then that
precisely
when Georgia, anyways. All right.
Yes.
That's it. Thank you, everybody. We will see you next time. Take care.
See you guys.
Pleasure.